King Charles has left Prince Harry a final, unexpected gift. No titles, no riches, but a handwritten journal. Filled with confessions, regrets, and raw truths about Diana, the monarchy, and fatherhood, it reportedly left Harry in tears. Insiders say this emotional gesture stunned the palace. Was it an olive branch, or a farewell? When Charles finalized his estate, many expected traditional inheritances. Art, jewels, estates. William would get the lion's share, and would receive family heirlooms, but Harry got something far more personal. Charles did something no one expected. He gave him a small, weathered journal. It wasn't ceremonial, just deeply personal. Inside were King Charles's handwritten reflections filled with grief and guilt, dating back to 1997, the year Diana died. Palace aides were stunned. One whispered, "This isn't protocol." Another said, "This left mouths open." For someone who felt betrayed by the institution, this wasn't just a gift, it was a rupture. Why would a king share something so raw and risky? Yet Charles did, without fanfare. No titles, no cameras, just a sealed box marked simply, "To my son." It was a final, vulnerable gesture. And what lay inside had the power to stir more than emotion. It could rewrite history. This wasn't just a gift. It was a confession. In the grief-soaked journal, Harry found something he never expected from his father: vulnerability. The early entries, jagged and nearly illegible, began days after Diana's death. Charles didn't write as a future king, but as a man consumed by guilt. "I failed your mother. I feared I'd fail you too," he repeated. The pages revealed shame, fear, and helplessness. His struggle to comfort his sons, his conflict between duty and grief, and nights haunted by Diana's voice. He admitted to his coldness, his fear of emotion, and questioned if the monarchy had erased his humanity. The entries about Harry were the most raw, describing a boy lost in pain, clinging to Diana's memory, pushed toward a life he didn't choose. "I saw it in his eyes," Charles wrote. "The same storm I carried, but without the armor." There were no edits or formalities. Just a father, finally trying to be understood. This wasn't just a journal. It was the truth Charles never dared say aloud. Harry received the journal with no warning. Just a courier, a signature, and silence. Confused, he took it to his private library. Meghan followed soon after, finding him alone, surrounded by pages, his hands trembling. He was reading aloud, shaken by the words. "I feared I'd fail you too," he whispered through tears. It wasn't rage or relief, just shock. For years, he had blamed his father for emotional neglect, for choosing duty over fatherhood. Now, the truth hit harder than he expected. In his hands were the raw thoughts of a man who had both confirmed long-held fears and revealed his own deep pain. Palace sources say Harry sat in silence for hours after reading the journal, staring into the fire as if seeing his childhood for the first time. He didn't call Charles or anyone, he just sat. When Meghan returned, she knelt beside him and said, "He gave you what words could never say." It wasn't reconciliation, but perhaps the start of healing. The real shift came with what Meghan said next. She listened without judgment as Harry read aloud, some parts in disbelief. Then softly she said, "Maybe this is the first true apology." For someone often blamed for pulling Harry away, her response could have stirred old wounds, but instead, it brought clarity. Instead, it reportedly opened a door. Palace insiders say Meghan urged Harry to see the journal not as manipulation, but as a flawed olive branch. She even suggested he respond, not publicly, but for closure. Sources say Meghan helped Harry write a letter that didn't forgive or reject, but simply said, "I hear you. I'm still hurt, but I see you now." It was Meghan's first private show of support for Charles, calling the journal more than a gift, a release. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Once seen as a wedge, Meghan now appeared to be a bridge. But as Harry processed the past, the palace scrambled. The journal wasn't just emotional, it was dangerous. And when its existence leaked, the monarchy lost control of the story. A PR earthquake followed. In royal crises, silence is the golden rule, but silence doesn't mean calm. Inside the palace, chaos erupted when a headline broke: Charles's secret journal gifted to Harry. No context, just speculation. Within hours, PR teams scrambled, phones rang non-stop, and meetings piled up. The journal hadn't gone through official channels. No filing, no approval, not even awareness from senior aides. It wasn't a gift. It was a grenade, one insider said. Many feared its contents could reignite scrutiny over Diana's death, Charles's emotional struggles, and the monarchy's fragile image. Some saw it as a brilliant act of emotional diplomacy, raw, human, and unexpected from a man often seen as distant. But the real question wasn't damage control, it was trust. If the king could share something so intimate with a son who had publicly criticized him, what else was hidden? What did Harry now hold? The journal wasn't a memoir or a media strategy. It was unfiltered, unfinished, and painfully honest. A mirror to the monarchy's deepest wounds. For Harry, who'd long felt unseen, reading it was like discovering a world he thought never existed. One entry described Charles watching Diana cry. "I stood in the doorway. I didn't go to her. I didn't know how." He blamed himself, for the pressure, the coldness, for not protecting her or their sons. In another, written after Diana's death, he recalled watching the boys play from a distance. "I knew they needed comfort, but I feared I was too broken to give it." And when it came to Harry, the words hurt most of all. Charles confessed that Harry's anger scared him, not for its defiance, but because it mirrored Diana's. Fierce, loving, and tragic. He feared losing Harry the same way. His journal spoke of missed birthdays, thoughts of quitting royal life, and strict advice to hide emotion. At times, he even dreamed of escaping with his sons to Scotland, away from cameras and duty. But he never left. One phrase echoed throughout: "I wanted to be better. I didn't know how." For Harry, reading those words, raw, handwritten, vulnerable, was something he never expected. But the revelations didn't stop there. One entry bore a different name, pulling William and Princess Anne straight into the storm. Though the journal was Harry's, its contents quickly rippled through the royal family. William and Anne were reportedly blindsided. Neither knew the journal existed or had ever received such emotional honesty from Charles, especially in writing. William's public response was quiet, it was his to give, but insiders say he was privately shaken, not by the content but by its implications. If the public learned Harry, not the heir, received Charles's deepest thoughts, what would that mean for the monarchy's legacy? And ever stoic, was more direct. Calling it personal fire, she warned aides. Don't play with it, not about Harry, but about Charles, who had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. If Harry ever released the journal, it would expose the monarchy in an emotionally devastating way. One part, shockingly addressed to William, contained a heartfelt plea, a father's dying wish. Though deeply moving, the journal didn't mend the family rift. Harry remains distanced. No calls, no visits, no reconciliation. His royal roles are gone, his children still lack HRH status, and King Charles hasn't publicly acknowledged the journal at all. For those hoping for reconciliation, the silence said it all. One insider called it a whisper of peace wrapped in a closed door. The words were heartfelt, but royal walls, tradition, protocol, image, don't crumble easily. If Charles meant for his journal to open the floodgates, he underestimated the dam holding everything back. Even within the family, tensions brewed. William, once close to Harry, refused to comment on a journal entry meant for him. Loyal to duty, he reminded staff that emotion doesn't run the firm. Behind polished appearances, the monarchy remains fractured, not by scandal, but by feeling. Yet one line in the journal still lingers. Just a page, just 2 words, but it may change everything. Forgive him. He continued, "You will rule. You must lead but never lead with coldness. If you lose your brother, the crown will mean less. Not to the world, to you." It was raw, direct, and deeply unlike the usual tone between monarch and heir. Charles didn't write to William as a king speaking to a prince. He wrote as a father pleading with a son. He described how he had spent years trying to hold the institution together, and in doing so, he had broken something far more fragile: family. He warned that the pressures of duty, if left unchecked, would devour empathy. That the throne must be built not just on protocol but on compassion. He told William, "If you don't protect Harry, you'll become me. And that is a fate I wouldn't wish for you." For William, the words were a mirror, a chance to see himself not just as a leader, but as a brother, a father, a man. But what would he do with them? That remains unclear. He hasn't responded to Harry. Not yet. He hasn't spoken of the journal publicly, and insiders say he remains internally conflicted because the burden of the crown is heavy. And now, Charles has passed it to him, along with the emotional debt he never repaid. Which brings us to the legacy. Because this gift wasn't gold or silver, it was truth. And it may change how we remember this king forever. A legacy gift unlike any other. Royal gifts are usually grand. Jewels pass through dynasties, scepters, portraits, military swords, symbolic power carved in gold. But King Charles didn't follow tradition. He gave his son something far more valuable and far more volatile. A diary full of regret, sorrow, and things never said. Historians are calling it one of the most personal artifacts ever passed between monarch and child. Some are comparing it to Edward VIII's abdication letter, emotional, historic, and brimming with private torment. Archivists have quietly begun urging Harry to preserve it not just as family memory, but as a royal record, a glimpse into the mind of a king not seen in speeches but in solitude. Yet Harry hasn't decided. Some insiders say he's torn. Part of him wants to guard the journal fiercely as a final conversation with a father he never truly had. Another part wonders if sharing it might finally show the world who Charles really was beneath the crown. Because in these pages, Charles didn't act like a monarch. He acted like a man, flawed, frightened, and full of feeling. And for a monarchy that often hides behind protocol, that may be the most powerful legacy he could have left. But legacy is only half the story. Because while the journal may close, the world is still reacting. And what's being said beyond the gates of Windsor might shape what comes next. Tears and theories. Once the leak happened, the world didn't wait. He continued, the news that King Charles had given Prince Harry a personal handwritten journal from the aftermath of Diana's death sent shock waves across media, podcasts, newsrooms, and dinner tables. It wasn't just a royal headline. It was an emotional reckoning. Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like #CharlesJournal and #TarashForgiveHim started trending within hours. Comments ranged from heartbreak to suspicion. Thousands praised the king for finally showing vulnerability, something the monarchy rarely allows. Others weren't so sure. Is this guilt or manipulation? Asked one viral tweet. A weaponized apology, said another. And yet, countless users simply responded with, "This made me cry." For many, it was the first time Charles felt human. Public sympathy for Harry also surged. People remembered his grief-stricken face behind Diana's coffin. They remembered his confession in interviews of not feeling protected, of being told to keep calm and carry on while breaking inside. And now, knowing that his father was feeling something all along but never said it, brought the pain full circle. Some royal commentators applauded the journal as a sign that the monarchy was evolving. They called it a moment of deep humanity in an institution built on silence. Others, especially more traditional analysts, warned that the emotional transparency could backfire. If the monarchy starts running on tears instead of tradition, said one critic, how long before it loses all mystique? Still, many ask the one question that matters most. What now? Would Harry finally forgive his father? Would Charles address the journal publicly? And most urgently, would this change anything at all? Because while public opinion was shifting, the monarchy itself remained characteristically mute. No statement, no clarification, no denial. Just silence and a nation waiting for a royal heartbeat. Parliament watches quietly. What began as an emotional gift has now drifted into political waters. It didn't take long for Parliament to take notice. Not officially, not yet. But beneath the surface, in hallways and offices, the conversations had already begun. A few MPs, particularly those in favor of greater royal transparency, started to ask subtle but serious questions. Is it acceptable for a reigning monarch to privately express regret over national events while remaining silent in public? Some wondered if the journal could be considered a state document, given its references to Diana's death, royal protocols, and succession. Others dismissed that concern, citing it as a private heirloom. Still, the buzz grew louder. Could this be precedent-setting? If the king shares personal reflections tied to constitutional duty, does that open the door for public inquiry? Could a diary be used as evidence in future debates about royal behavior? Could it one day influence policies tied to royal funding, roles, or even succession? It's not about the ink on the pages. It's about what that ink represents. He continued, for decades the monarchy has stood as both symbol and silence. The journal, emotional, intimate, conflicted, chips away at that silence. It introduces feeling into a role meant to rise above it. Now Parliament is watching, not out of malice but out of awareness, because the journal revealed a monarch who privately wrestled with decisions that shaped a generation and failed to speak them aloud, until now. If more writings exist, or if Harry decides to publish, it could shift not just hearts but laws. What started as a final gift may become a constitutional conversation. And yet, for Harry, one question still matters more than all the others. Olive branch or goodbye? Was it an act of peace or a father's last goodbye? As the dust begins to settle, that's the question everyone is still asking. Not just the public, not just historians, but Harry himself. Was the journal an invitation to reconcile, or a quiet farewell, the only way King Charles could say what he never managed in person? According to those close to Harry, he still hasn't reached out directly. He's reading and rereading the journal. Sometimes late at night. Meghan has been supportive but careful. There's no rush, no pressure, just space. Because healing doesn't happen on royal timelines. And while some hope Harry will fly to London, will walk through the gates of Clarence House, journal in hand, it hasn't happened yet. Some insiders believe it never will. Because even a handwritten confession doesn't erase years of silence. Even truth, when it arrives late, doesn't always fix what time has unraveled. Sometimes it just explains it. But here's what we do know. The journal changed something. It opened a window. It cracked the wall. It brought emotion to a palace built on restraint. And it left behind a simple human truth. That even kings can regret. That fathers, no matter how royal, sometimes say too little, too late. As for Harry, he may respond. He may not. He may write back. He may speak aloud. Or he may simply keep the journal, unread by the world, tucked away like a letter that never needed to be answered. But whether it leads to reunion or remains a solitary gesture, one thing is clear. This wasn't just a royal gift. It was a page turned. And whatever happens next, the monarchy will never be able to say it didn't know how Harry felt, or how Charles did. The diary closes. But the story, like all great royal sagas, is far from over. One journal. A father's truth. A son's silence. What happens next? Only time will tell. But this final gift has already rewritten the rules of royal legacy. If you found this story as moving as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it.